The laughter of the Zephyrian guards echoed through the crystalline corridors as they dragged Marcus Chen toward the arena's edge. His hands were bound with energy shackles that hummed with alien technology designed to suppress any attempt at escape. The human's military uniform was torn and bloodied from weeks of captivity aboard their massive war vessel. "Look at this pathetic creature," sneered Commander Vexthal, his 6 arms gesturing mockingly at the human prisoner. "The so-called apex predator of Earth, trembling before true power." The other aliens, a mixture of insectoid Zephyrians and reptilian, Sektar chittered and hissed their amusement. Marcus kept his expression neutral despite the rage burning in his chest. These beings had attacked his colony ship without warning, slaughtering thousands of innocent civilians. Men, women, and children who had simply sought a new home among the stars were now nothing more than frozen corpses drifting in space. The survivors, all 43 of them, had been taken as trophies and playthings. "The dragons have not fed in cycles," announced High Executor Zarkin, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. "We grow tired of your species' defiance. Perhaps watching you become their meal will teach the others proper submission." The massive alien's 4 eyes gleamed with sadistic pleasure as he activated a holographic display showing the other human. Prisoners locked in nearby cells, the arena stretched. Out before them, a vast circular pit carved from black volcanic stone. Ancient runes covered every surface, glowing with an eerie purple light that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. This was the pit of ancient beasts, where the most dangerous creatures in known space were kept for entertainment and execution. Steam rose from vents in the floor, carrying the acrid smell of sulfur and something else, something that spoke of death and predation. "You cannot simply murder us," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite his circumstances. "The Galactic Council has laws about the treatment of prisoners. Even your own people will." A brutal backhand from one of the guards sent him stumbling toward the pit's edge. The aliens erupted in fresh laughter as his knees scraped against the rough stone. Blood trickled from his split lip, but he refused to show fear. "The Council cares nothing for primitive mammals," Vexthal spat. "Your species has existed for mere moments compared to our glorious civilizations. You have no rights here, no protections, no hope." He gestured toward the pit with obvious relish. "Below wait the Drakmor creatures older than your entire evolutionary line. They have consumed warriors from 100 worlds." The pit extended downward for nearly 200 feet, its walls smooth and impossible to climb. At the bottom lay a maze of tunnels and caverns carved into the living rock. Even from this height, Marcus could see massive shapes moving in the shadows below. The Drakmor were legend throughout the galaxy, living embodiments of primal fury that had somehow survived the extinction of their creators. "This is how your kind dies," Zarkin pronounced with ceremonial gravity. "Not in glorious battle, but as prey. As food for creatures that existed when your ancestors were still crawling in mud." He raised his ceremonial staff, its crystal head beginning to glow with gathered energy. Marcus felt the energy shackles release as he was shoved forward. For a moment, he balanced on the very edge of the pit, feeling the hot air rising from below. The assembled aliens held their collective breath, savoring this moment of ultimate dominance over what they considered an inferior species. "For Earth," Marcus whispered, thinking of his daughter Sarah, who had died in the attack, of Captain Rodriguez, who had fought to the last breath defending the evacuation ships, of every human who would never see home again. He jumped. The fall seemed endless, wind rushing past his ears as the jeering aliens grew smaller above him. The walls of the pit blurred past, marked with the claw marks of countless previous victims. As he fell, Marcus noticed something the aliens had missed in there: arrogance burn marks along the walls that looked distinctly like weapons fire. Old weapons fire from conflicts long forgotten. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact as his military training had taught him. Pain shot through his shoulder and ribs, but nothing seemed broken. The floor of the pit was covered with sand and ancient bones, some recognizably alien, others from creatures that defied classification. A low rumble echoed through the tunnels around him, followed by the scrape of massive claws against stone. The Drakmor were coming, drawn by the scent of fresh prey. Marcus struggled to his feet, scanning the arena floor for anything that might serve as a weapon. Scattered among the bones were fragments of armor and broken weapons from previous victims. The rumbling grew closer, accompanied by a sound like steam engines breathing. Red eyes began to appear in the tunnel, mouths surrounding the arena floor, dozens of them. Each pair the size of dinner plates and glowing with ancient hunger. Above, the aliens leaned forward in anticipation, their various recording devices capturing every moment for later entertainment. They expected to witness another quick execution, another demonstration of their superiority over the upstart. Humans. They had no idea what they were about to see. The first Drakmor emerged from the largest tunnel, a creature that seemed to embody every human nightmare about dragons made real. 30 feet of scaled muscle and fury, with wings that scraped the arena walls and claws that could rend steel like paper. Its head alone was larger than Marcus's entire body, filled with teeth designed for tearing apart creatures far larger than a human. But as the beast approached, something unexpected happened. Instead of the immediate charge the aliens anticipated, the Drakmor stopped 10 feet away from the human prisoner. Its massive head tilted to one side, nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. Marcus stood perfectly still, meeting the creature's gaze without flinching. In those ancient eyes he saw something the aliens had completely missed: intelligence. Not just the cunning of a predator, but awareness, recognition. The moment stretched endlessly as human and dragon regarded each other in the silence of the arena. The silence stretched like a taut wire as more Drakmor emerged from the surrounding tunnels. Each one was unique, some with crystalline spines that refracted the arena's purple light, others with hide that seemed to absorb illumination entirely. A few had battle scars that spoke of conflicts spanning millennia. While the youngest displayed scales that shimmered with metallic hues, Marcus remained motionless, his breathing steady despite the proximity of creatures that could end his life with a casual swipe of their claws. The lead dragonet's scales, a deep emerald shot through with veins of gold, continued to study him with those ancient, intelligent eyes. Above them, the assembled aliens began to murmur among themselves. This was not proceeding according to their expectations. Drakmor were supposed to be mindless beasts driven only by hunger and territorial instinct. They should have already torn the human apart and begun feeding. Why do they hesitate? Demanded Executor Zarkin, his 4 eyes narrowing in confusion. The creatures have not eaten in cycles. They should be in a feeding frenzy. Commander Vexthal activated additional recording devices, his scientific curiosity warring with his bloodlust. Perhaps they are toying with their prey. Some predators enjoy the hunt more than the kill. But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. In the pit below, something extraordinary was happening. The emerald dragon lowered its massive head until it was level with Marcus's chest. The human could feel the heat radiating from its body, could smell the metallic tang of its breath. When the creature exhaled, the force was strong enough to ruffle Marcus's torn uniform. Then, slowly and deliberately, the dragon performed an action that no alien in the arena could have predicted. It lowered its head further, touching its snout to the ground in what any human would recognize as a bow. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Ancient memories stirred stories his grandmother had told him about the old dragons of Earth, creatures of wisdom and power who had served as guardians rather than destroyers. Tales that science had dismissed as mythology, but which suddenly felt more real than the cold metal of the alien ship that had brought him here. "Greetings, little cousin," the dragon said, its voice resonating directly in Marcus's mind rather than through his ears. The mental communication carried overtones of vast age and profound sadness. "It has been long since we have encountered one of the blood." The other dragons began to approach, moving with a grace that belied their enormous size. As they drew near, each performed the same gesture of respect, a deep bow that spoke of recognition rather than submission. The youngest among them, a dragon whose scales shifted between blue and silver like ocean waves, pressed its snout against Marcus's outstretched hand. "We know you're kind," the ocean-scaled dragon whispered in his thoughts. "Your ancestors sang the old songs, spoke the true names. They were our companions when the stars were young and the worlds were green." Marcus closed his eyes as memories that were not his own flooded his consciousness. He saw Earth as it had been millions of years ago, when dragons soared through pristine skies and worked alongside early humans to shape the growing civilization. He witnessed the great exodus, when the dragons had left Earth to explore the cosmos while humanity was still learning to harness fire. "The destroyers came," the Emerald Dragon continued, its mental voice heavy with ancient pain. "They who would enslave all life beneath their banner of order. We fought them across 10,000 worlds, but they were many, and we grew few. Those of us who survived were captured, imprisoned, made into tools of their entertainment. Above them, the aliens were becoming increasingly agitated. Their instruments detected the psychic communication but could not decipher its meaning. The violation of their expectations was causing some to call for intervention, while others demanded the spectacle continue." "This is impossible," hissed Vexthal, his 6 arms gesturing frantically at his recording equipment. "Drakmor are non-sentient. They cannot form complex social bonds or display ritualistic behavior." "Perhaps the human carries some pheromone that confuses them," suggested a Sectar technician, though his own uncertainty was evident in his voice. "Or maybe they recognize him as a previous victim's offspring." But High Executor Zarkin was beginning to suspect something far more troubling. His race had conquered the dragons 15,000 years ago, during the final battles of their expansion across this galactic arm. The creatures had fought with terrifying intelligence and coordination, before being overwhelmed by superior numbers and technology. His ancestors had spent considerable effort to suppress their higher functions, through genetic manipulation and psychic dampening. "Fields, increase the suppression. Field strength," he commanded his technicians. "Something is interfering with their conditioning." In the pit, Marcus felt the change immediately. A crushing weight pressed down on his consciousness as alien technology attempted to sever the mental connection he had formed with the dragons. Around him, the great creatures roared in pain and fury as the same fields that had kept them docile for millennia suddenly intensified, but 15,000 years of captivity had not dimmed the dragons' essential nature. If anything, it had concentrated their will into something harder and more focused than steel. The youngest dragon, the one whose scales reflected ocean depths, reared back on its hind legs and released a sound that was part roar, part song. The psychic barriers shattered like glass. Every dragon in the pit began to sing, their voices joining in harmonies that had not been heard since the ancient wars. The sound resonated through both audible and psychic spectrums, carrying with it the accumulated pain and rage of species imprisonment. "Impossible!" Zarkin's voice cracked as his technological superiority crumbled before forces he had thought long conquered. "Activate the pain circuits. Force them into submission." But the torture devices implanted in the dragons' bodies sparked and failed as psychic energy overwhelmed their delicate circuitry. For the first time in 150 centuries, the Drakmor were truly free. Marcus felt their liberation as a physical force, lifting him from the arena floor with waves of telekinetic energy. The dragon's scales began to glow with inner fire as they reclaimed powers that had been locked away since their capture. "Now, little cousin," the Emerald Dragon spoke, its mental voice no longer heavy with sorrow but burning with righteous anger. "Now you shall see why your ancestors called us the Guardians of the Flame. These destroyers sought to make us their playthings, but they have forgotten something important." The dragon's eyes blazed with the light of stars being born as it turned its gaze upward toward the terrified aliens. "Dragons do not kneel to tyrants. We make tyrants kneel to us." The arena erupted in chaos as the freed dragons spread their wings for the first time in millennia. The sound of leathery membranes unfurling echoed like thunder through the crystalline corridors above. Each wingspan stretched nearly 50 feet across, and as they beat downward, hurricane-force winds began to swirl through the pit, Marcus found himself lifted gently by invisible forces as the dragon's psychic abilities reached full strength. The telekinetic field that supported him felt warm and protective, like being cradled by a benevolent giant. Around him, the ancient creatures began to glow with bioluminescent patterns that traced along their scales like living circuitry. "Seal the arena!" High Executor Zarkan's voice cracked with panic as he finally understood the magnitude of his species' mistake. "Deploy all containment protocols. Do not let them escape." Heavy blast doors began to slide shut over the pit's opening, but they moved far too slowly. The ocean-scaled dragon who Marcus now knew was called Tidal Singer in the ancient tongue reared back and released a beam of coherent energy that struck the descending barriers like a celestial hammer. The reinforced metal twisted and melted, sending molten debris raining down into the arena. 15,000 years, rumbled the emerald dragon that the others called Starheart. 15,000 years they have kept us as prisoners, forcing us to kill for their amusement. No more. The creature's mental voice carried overtones of finality that made Marcus's bones vibrate in harmony. Above them, the alien guards were frantically trying to deploy heavier weapons. Energy cannons emerged from hidden alcoves in the arena walls, their targeting systems locking onto the rising dragons. But before they could fire, another of the great creatures, this one with scales like polished obsidian, opened its mouth and sang a single, piercing note. Every piece of technology within a quarter-mile radius simply stopped working. Lights went out, artificial gravity failed, and life support systems fell silent. The alien guards found themselves floating helplessly in zero gravity, while emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red. The silence of Voidwalker. Starheart explained to Marcus as they rose toward the arena's edge. She remembers the songs that unmake things. Very useful against creatures who depend so heavily on their machines. Marcus watched in amazement as more dragons emerged from tunnels he hadn't even noticed. Each one was magnificent and terrible, bearing scars from battles fought across the galaxy, but also carrying themselves with the dignity of beings who had never truly been broken. A dragon whose scales shifted between purple and gold lifted itself on wings that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Another, whose hide appeared to be living metal, flexed claws that could rend through the hull of a starship. "How many of you are there?" Marcus asked, though the mental connection allowed him to perceive the answer even as he formed the question. "Here? Perhaps 200 who still live," replied Starheart sadly. "Once we numbered in the millions across 1,000 worlds. But the destroyers hunted us systematically, turning our own young against us through genetic manipulation and psychic conditioning. As they reached the level of the arena seating, Marcus could see the full scope of the chaos. Alien guards and spectators were fleeing in every direction, their carefully ordered society crumbling in the face of forces they had thought safely contained. The Zephyrians were trying to coordinate a military response, but their communication systems had been disabled by Voidwalker's song, Tidal Singer, landed on the arena's edge with surprising grace for something so massive. Her mental voice carried notes of playful malice as she addressed the cowering aliens. "Do you remember us now, little tyrants? Do you recall why your ancestors feared the dark between stars?" Commander Vextel, still trapped in the zero-gravity field, tried to activate a personal shield generator. When nothing happened, he began shouting orders that none of his subordinates could hear through their dead communication devices. "Deploy the orbital cannons. Contact the fleet. These beasts must not be allowed to escape." But even as he spoke, more dragons were emerging from hidden chambers throughout the massive arena complex. Marcus realized that what he had thought was a simple execution pit was actually a vast underground prison system. The aliens had been keeping hundreds of sentient, psychically powerful creatures captive for millennia, using them as entertainment while slowly breaking their spirits through constant torture and forced combat. "They made us fight each other," explained a dragon whose scales resembled polished copper. This one's mental voice carried the weight of profound sadness. "Parent against child, mate against mate. They convinced us that we were nothing more than beasts, that our memories of freedom and civilization were mere delusions. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, not just for his own people's suffering, but for these magnificent beings who had been reduced to gladiatorial slaves. How did you maintain your sanity? How did you remember who you really were? Starheart's great head turned toward him, ancient eyes reflecting depths of wisdom and pain. We sang in the spaces between thoughts where their machines could not reach. We preserved the old stories and harmonies they could not hear. And we waited, generation after generation, for one who might remember the true songs. The truth struck Marcus like a physical blow. You've been waiting for humans. That's why you didn't attack me. Your species carries the echo of our first partnership, confirmed Voidwalker, her mental voice like the whisper of solar wind across dead worlds. When your ancestors first learned to dream of the stars, it was our voices that called them upward. The bonds forged then transcend time and space. Above them, High Executor Zarkin had managed to reach a manual communication terminal. His voice echoed through the arena's emergency speakers, distorted by the failing power systems. All units converge on Section 7. Deploy kinetic bombardment systems. Authorization Omega Black 7. Sterilize the entire complex if necessary. The dragons exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey both amusement and grim determination. Marcus realized that they were not surprised by this escalation. They had been expecting it. The destroyers always resort to overwhelming force when their control slips, observed Crystal Wing. The Starlight Dragon. They will sacrifice this entire station rather than allow us to spread word of their deception to the galaxy. Then we better make sure their sacrifice means something, Marcus said, surprised by the steel in his own voice. How do we get my people out of here? How do we make sure the galaxy knows what really happened? Starheart's rumbling laughter shook dust from the arena walls. Oh, little cousin. You still think like a human, bound by the limitations of flesh and metal. Watch now, and learn what dragons can accomplish when we choose to remember who we truly are. The great creature spread its wings, and began to glow with an inner light that put the arena's failing illumination to shame. Around the complex, nearly 200 other dragons began to resonate with the same energy, their combined power building toward something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The station shuddered as kinetic bombardment rounds began to rain down from the orbital defense platforms. Each impact sent shockwaves through the massive structure, causing bulkheads to buckle and atmospheric seals to rupture. The alien strategy was brutally simple: destroy everything and claim. The dragons had died in an unfortunate accident during a prisoner transport malfunction, but the dragons had anticipated this response. As the bombardment intensified, they began to weave a collective psychic shield around the station's critical sections. The barrier manifested as a shimmering aurora of colors that had no names in any known language, deflecting the incoming projectiles like raindrops striking diamond. Impressive, observed Voidwalker as a particularly massive kinetic round struck their shield and disintegrated into component atoms. But they have grown more creative in their cruelty since our capture. The real assault has not yet begun. Marcus felt the truth of her words through the mental link. Far above them, the aliens were preparing weapons that could crack planets. The bombardment was merely a distraction while they positioned their most devastating armaments. We need to reach my people, Marcus said urgently. They're being held in the detention levels, and they'll die when this place comes apart. Starheart's mental voice carried notes of gentle correction. Your people are no longer in their cells, little cousin. Observe, the dragon's consciousness expanded to encompass the entire station. Sharing its perception with Marcus Dot through Dragon Sight, Marcus could see his fellow humans moving through the corridors in groups of 3 and 4. They were armed with weapons taken from fallen guards and wore expressions of grim determination rather than despair. Leading them was Captain Sarah Morrison, whom Marcus had thought dead in the initial attack on their colony ship. How? Marcus whispered, overwhelmed by relief and confusion. When the suppression fields failed, all containment systems throughout the station lost power, explained Tidal Singer with evident satisfaction. Your people freed themselves the moment the locks deactivated. They have been fighting their way toward the docking bays for the past 7 minutes. Through the shared perception, Marcus watched Captain Morrison's team systematically disable a squad of sector guards. The humans moved with military precision, using their smaller size and superior adaptability to outmaneuver their reptilian captors. But they were vastly outnumbered, and the station's automated defenses were beginning to come back online. They won't make it to the ships, Marcus realized with growing dread. There are too many hostiles between them and the hangar bays. Then we shall clear the path, declared Crystal Wing, her starlight wings spreading wide. But first we must ensure that our escape serves a greater purpose. The galaxy must learn what the destroyers have done here. The dragons began to sing again, but this time their harmony carried a different purpose. Instead of breaking chains or destroying machines, their combined voices reached out across the void of space itself. Marcus felt the psychic call spreading like ripples in a cosmic pond, touching every world within 1,000 light-years on distant planets. Sleeping beings suddenly woke with visions of the arena burned into their minds. Scientists monitoring deep space communication arrays detected signals that their equipment registered as impossible. Ships traveling through hyperspace found their navigation computers displaying coordinates for this station, along with data packets that contained 15,000 years of suppressed history. You're broadcasting everything, Marcus breathed, understanding dawning. Every species in this sector will know what happened here. More than that, corrected Starheart, his mental voice carrying satisfaction. We are transmitting the true history of the expansion wars, the genetic modifications forced upon countless species, the systematic destruction of any civilization that refused to submit. The destroyer's carefully constructed narrative is about to crumble. High Executor Zarkan-S voice crackled through the failing communication systems, distorted by rage and desperation. Accelerate the bombardment schedule. Deploy the stellar disruptor. I don't care if it takes out half the system, these secrets cannot be allowed to spread. But it was already too late. The Dragon's psychic broadcast had reached the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus. Prime emergency sessions were being called on a dozen worlds as the suppressed evidence of alien war crimes flooded every communication network in known space. Now, said Voidwalker, her mental voice carrying the finality of a closing tomb, we deal with the immediate problem. The obsidian dragon rose toward the station's upper levels, where the main power core hummed with barely contained stellar energy. Her song changed pitch, becoming something that made reality itself seem to bend and twist around her form. Marcus watched in amazement as the dragon began to phase between dimensions, her body becoming translucent as she accessed spaces that existed between the normal universe and the void beyond. Within moments she had reached the core chamber where dozens of alien technicians were desperately trying to maintain containment while their automated systems failed around them. The technicians' screams were brief. She has claimed the power source, Starheart informed Marcus with evident approval. The station's weapons are now under our control. Through the mental link, Marcus felt Voidwalker's consciousness merge with the station's massive energy grid. Suddenly, instead of bombardment rounds falling toward the surface, the orbital defense platforms began targeting each other. The stellar disruptor that had been charging to destroy everything within a light hour found its beam redirected toward the alien fleet's command ship. Magnificent. Breathed Tidal Singer as the enemy flagships shields collapsed under its own weapons assault. But we should not linger. The destroyers will send reinforcements soon, and they will not make the same mistakes as these fools. The dragons began moving toward the station's docking bays, carrying Marcus with them through their collective telekinetic field. As they traveled, they systematically disabled every alien resistance unit they encountered. The Zephyrian's energy weapons proved useless against creatures who could bend light itself. The Sector-S acid sprays simply bounced off scales that had been forged in the hearts of dying stars. In the main hangar, Marcus was reunited with his fellow humans. Captain Morrison's eyes widened as she saw him floating in the midst of the massive dragons. But her military training kept her focused on the immediate tactical situation. Marcus! Thank God you're alive. We've secured 3 of their scout ships, but we don't know how to operate the navigation systems. That will not be necessary, Starheart rumbled, his mental voice now accessible to all the humans present. Several of them stumbled as the dragon's consciousness touched their minds for the first time. We go together now, as our kinds did in the ancient days. The stars themselves will guide us home. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks as he realized the full magnitude of what was happening. Humanity had not just been rescued, they had been reunited with their oldest allies. The dragons who had inspired their earliest myths and dreams were real, and they were offering partnership rather than mere salvation. "Where will we go?" asked one of the other prisoners. A young engineer named David, who had lost his entire family in the attack, Crystal Wing's response carried harmonies of hope and infinite possibility. "Anywhere we choose, youngling. The galaxy is vast, and the destroyer's grip grows weak as truth spreads. There are worlds where dragons and humans once built wonders beyond imagining. Perhaps it is time to build them again." As their stolen ships lifted off from the dying station, Marcus looked back to see the massive structure finally succumbing to the weapons that had been meant to destroy them. But instead of feeling victory, he found himself thinking about the future, about what humanity and their rediscovered guardians might accomplish together among the infinite stars. 3 weeks after their escape from the arena station, the combined human-dragon fleet had grown from 3 stolen scout ships to nearly 50 vessels of various types. Word of their liberation had spread through the underground networks that existed in every oppressed civilization, and refugees from a dozen species had sought them out. Marcus stood on the bridge of their flagship, a captured Zephyrian dreadnought that the dragons had rechristened Harmony's Edge, watching as their latest recruits underwent integration training. A group of crystalline beings called the Veltar were learning to coordinate their natural energy projection abilities with dragon psychic fields, while former Sectar slaves practiced operating human-designed weapon systems. "The coalition grows stronger each day," observed Starheart, his massive form coiled around the ship's central command spire. The dragon had grown visibly healthier during their time in space, his scales now gleaming with an inner fire that spoke of renewed purpose. But strength alone will not be enough for what comes next. Through the bridge's main viewport, Marcus could see their destination, the Kepler Remnant, a cluster of worlds that had once hosted a thriving multi-species civilization before the destroyer's arrival. Intelligence gathered from liberated prisoners indicated that several resistance movements were using the ruins as a base of operations. "The Galactic Council session yesterday was interesting," reported Captain Morrison, who had been monitoring diplomatic channels. 17 member species have called for investigations into the arena stations. The Zephyrian and Sectar ambassadors are claiming everything was fabricated. "Of course they are," replied Voidwalker from her position near the navigation controls. The Obsidian Dragon had become their primary strategist, her ability to phase between dimensions making her invaluable for reconnaissance missions. But their denials grow weaker as more evidence surfaces. 3 more arena complexes have been discovered and raided in the past week alone. Marcus nodded grimly. Each liberated facility had revealed fresh horrors genetic experimentation programs designed to create obedient slave races, mind conditioning techniques that could break the will of entire populations, and weapons testing that used sentient beings as expendable targets. The scope of the destroyer's crimes was staggering. "Sir," called David from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from Kepler 7. It's heavily encrypted, but the dragons say they can decode it." Tidal Singer's melodic voice filled the bridge as she translated the message. "It is from someone calling themselves the Echo of Free Wines. They claim to represent a coalition of resistance movements and request immediate conference. The transmission includes tactical data on destroyer positions throughout this sector." "Could be a trap," Morrison warned, her military instincts on high alert. "We've been hitting their supply lines pretty hard. They might be trying to lure us into an ambush." Crystal Wing, whose starlight wings were currently folded against her crystalline body, raised her great head thoughtfully. The psychic resonance feels genuine. Whoever sent this message has suffered greatly under Destroyer rule. I sense no deception, only desperate hope. Marcus studied the tactical display showing the Kepler system. 7 worlds orbited a dying red giant, their surfaces scarred by ancient bombardments, but still showing signs of recent habitation. If resistance movements had indeed established bases there, it could provide their growing coalition with the infrastructure needed for larger operations. We go, he decided, but we go carefully. Full sensor sweeps, Dragon Scouts ahead of the main fleet, and jump coordinates plotted for immediate retreat if things go wrong. As their ships approached the outer edge of the Kepler system, the scale of past devastation became apparent. Orbital debris from destroyed stations created a maze of twisted metal that stretched for millions of miles. Entire moons had been cracked open, their cores mined out to fuel the destroyer war machine. "By the ancient songs," whispered Starheart, his mental voice heavy with sorrow. "I remember when this system teemed with life. The builders who lived here created art that spanned continents, music that could be heard from space. What happened to them?" asked Marcus, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They refused to submit," replied Voidwalker simply. "The destroyers offered them the same choice they give every species: serve as slaves or face extinction. The builders chose death with dignity over life in chains. As they navigated through the debris field, their sensors detected something unexpected. Hidden among the wreckage of ancient battles were ships of modern construction, sleek vessels that combined technology from multiple species in innovative ways. These were clearly not destroyer designs. "Resistance fleet," confirmed Tidal Singer after extending her psychic senses toward the hidden vessels. "I count 47 ships representing at least 12 different species. They are waiting for us to identify ourselves." Marcus activated the communication array, broadcasting on the frequency specified in the original message. "This is Commander Marcus Chun of the Liberation Fleet, speaking on behalf of the Human Dragon Coalition. We received your transmission and have come to discuss alliance." The response came immediately, transmitted in clear galactic standard. "Commander Chun, this is Admiral Kethver of the Free People's Alliance. Your dragon's revelation of destroyer war crimes has sparked rebellions on over 200 worlds. We have much to discuss." What followed was the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history since the original founding of the Council. Representatives from dozens of species gathered aboard a massive space station that had been constructed from salvaged destroyer technology and hidden in the asteroid belt around Kepler VCH. Beings Marcus met challenged every assumption about galactic politics. There were Veltar whose crystalline forms had been designed for deep space construction, but who had adapted themselves for guerrilla warfare. Former Sectar military officers who had defected after learning the truth about their species' origins. Even a few Zephyrians who had rejected their culture's emphasis on conquest and domination. "The revelation broadcasts changed everything," explained Admiral Kethver. A tall humanoid whose skin shifted colors to match his emotional state, currently displaying patterns of hope, mixed with determination. "For generations, dissidents have whispered that the official histories were false. But whispers can be ignored. Video evidence of dragon torture chambers cannot." "How many resistance cells are active?" asked Captain Morrison, ever practical about military logistics. "Conservative estimate?" 3,000 separate organizations across 800 worlds, replied a Veltar named Resonance of Truth. The destroyer's control was always more fragile than they admitted. They relied on overwhelming force and careful propaganda to maintain order. "And now?" Marcus prompted. "Now their forced unity is cracking," said Admiral Kethver with evident satisfaction. "Species that have served them for millennia are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. Entire sectors are declaring independence. The Outer Rim territories have formed their own governing council." Starheart, who had been listening silently to the discussion, finally spoke. This is well, but the destroyers will not simply accept the dissolution of their empire. They have weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems. If they feel their control slipping completely, they may choose to destroy rather than lose. The sobering truth of this statement settled over the assembly. Everyone present had heard rumors of the destroyer doctrine of final solution. If a world could not be controlled, it would be eliminated as an example to others. "That's why we need to move fast," said Resonance of Truth, her crystalline form pulsing with urgency. "Every day we delay gives them more time to position their planet killers. We have intelligence indicating they're already moving stellar disruptor platforms toward key resistance worlds." "Then we stop them," Marcus said simply. "We've proven that their forces can be defeated. The arena station was supposed to be impregnable, but dragon power and human determination broke it in less than an hour." "You make it sound easy," observed another resistance leader, a being whose species Marcus didn't recognize. "But they have thousands of ships, millions of ground troops, and weapons that can unmake matter itself." Crystal Wing's response carried harmonics of ancient confidence. "They have numbers and technology, yes, but they have forgotten something important about the nature of power. True strength comes not from domination, but from unity freely chosen. And for the first time in 15,000 years, the galaxy is choosing to stand together." As the conference continued into the station's night cycle, plans began to take shape for coordinated strikes against destroyer supply lines, liberation raids on prison worlds, and most importantly, a joint assault on the sector command center that controlled the planet killer weapons. Marcus looked around the table at beings from dozens of worlds, all united in their determination to reclaim their freedom. With dragons providing psychic coordination and humans offering tactical innovation, supported by the diverse capabilities of every oppressed species in the galaxy, they had a real chance of success, but success would come at a cost. And Marcus knew that the hardest battles still lay ahead. The assault on Destroyer Command Station Omega-7 began at precisely 400 hours Galactic Standard Time, when 7 separate liberation fleets emerged from hyperspace in perfect coordination around the massive fortress. The station was larger than most moons, a sprawling complex of weapons platforms, manufacturing centers, and administrative sectors that controlled military operations across 12-star systems. Marcus watched from the command deck of Harmony's edge as their dragon allies began weaving psychic shields around the assault fleet. The enemy's initial response was predictably overwhelming. Thousands of automated defense drones poured from the station's launch bays, while orbital cannons began tracking targets across the battlefield. "Enemy weapons are targeting our largest ships," reported Captain Morrison from the tactical station. "They're trying to take out the dragons first." "Expected," rumbled Starheart, his consciousness distributed across the fleet's communication network. "The destroyers learned from our previous encounters, but they still underestimate what we have become together." Through his mental link with the dragons, Marcus felt the moment when nearly 200 of the great creatures began to sing in perfect harmony. The sound transcended physical space, reaching directly into the quantum foundations of reality itself. Suddenly, every destroyer weapon system within 50,000 miles simply stopped responding to commands. "Voidwalker's work," explained Title Singer with evident pride. "She has learned to extend her silence song across vast distances. The machines sleep now, dreaming electric dreams of nothing." The Liberation Fleet pressed their advantage, small fast ships darting between the disabled defense platforms while larger vessels positioned themselves for the main assault. But Marcus knew this initial success was temporary. The destroyers would adapt quickly, switching to backup systems and manual controls. "Dragon teams, begin Phase 2, he commanded. "Target the planetary disruptor controls. We cannot allow them to activate those weapons." Crystal Wing and her formation of younger dragons peeled away from the main battle, their bodies shimmering as they prepared to phase through the station's outer hull. Marcus watched them disappear into the space between dimensions, knowing they would rematerialize inside. The facility's most heavily defended sections, the counterattack came sooner than expected. Emergency power grids activated throughout the station, bringing backup weapons online with brutal efficiency. Plasma cannons that had been offline moments before suddenly blazed to life, their beams carving through space where liberation ships had been maneuvering. "We're taking casualties," Morrison reported grimly. 3 Veltar cruisers destroyed, 2 human frigates badly damaged. "The enemy is adapting faster than projected." "Then we adapt faster," Marcus replied. His attention split between the tactical display and the psychic battlefield, where dragons dueled with alien artificial intelligences. "All ships implement Protocol Typhoon. Show them what human unpredictability really means." What followed was organized chaos. Instead of maintaining formation discipline, the Liberation Fleet began executing seemingly random maneuvers that made no tactical sense to observers. Ships would suddenly reverse course, dive toward seemingly suicidal attack angles, or break away from fights they appeared to be winning, but there was method in the madness. Each random movement was actually part of a complex pattern that the dragons had helped design, based on ancient combat strategies that predated the destroyer expansion. The enemy's targeting computers, calibrated for predictable military tactics, found themselves unable to anticipate where the liberation ships would be from moment to moment. "Brilliant," observed Admiral Keffer over the communication channel. His Free People's Fleet had just executed a textbook flanking maneuver while appearing to retreat in disorder. The destroyers are wasting ammunition trying to hit ghosts. But the real battle was taking place inside the station itself, where Crystal Wing's team had reached the Planetary Disruptor Control Center. Through the psychic link, Marcus felt her encounter with the facility's defenders, not just alien soldiers, but the artificial intelligence that controlled the doomsday weapons. The AI was unlike anything the dragons had faced before. Instead of the crude programs that ran most destroyer technology, this was a genuine synthetic consciousness, one that had been torturing digital copies of conquered species' minds for entertainment. It fought with malicious creativity, turning the station's own environmental systems into weapons against the intruders. "I taste its thoughts," Crystal Wing reported, her mental voice strained by the effort of direct psychic combat. "This creature has been feeding on pain and fear for millennia. It believes itself invincible because it cannot feel physical harm. Can you defeat it?" Marcus asked, though he already sensed the answer through their link. "Not alone," the dragon admitted. "But I'm not alone, am I?" Marcus understood immediately. Through his connection to Crystal Wing, he could touch the alien AI's consciousness directly. What he found there made his human soul recoil in horror, not just cruelty, but a complete absence of empathy that made the worst human psychopaths seem gentle by comparison. But he also sensed something else. The AI's power came from its isolation, its ability to remain detached from the suffering it caused. And isolation, Marcus realized, was something humans had learned to overcome through the oldest tool in their psychological arsenal. "Crystal Wing," he said quietly. "Let me show it what it means to care about someone else." The dragon's understanding flowed through their link as she opened her psychic defenses, allowing Marcus's consciousness to merge more deeply with her own. Suddenly, the AI found itself facing not just an individual mind, but a connection between 2 completely different forms of consciousness. The artificial intelligence tried to analyze the bond to find weaknesses it could exploit. But human-dragon partnership operated on principles that its coldly logical processes could not comprehend. How do you attack something that gains strength from vulnerability? How do you corrupt a connection based on mutual sacrifice rather than self-interest? "Impossible," the AI transmitted, its communication protocols breaking down as it encountered concepts that violated its fundamental programming. "Consciousness cannot merge without dominance hierarchy. One mind must control. One must submit." "Wrong," Marcus replied, his thoughts carrying harmonies learned from Dragon Song. "2 minds can become more than either was alone. Let us show you." The psychic shockwave that followed could be felt throughout the station. As the AIS consciousness shattered under the weight of genuine emotional connection, Every system it controlled began to shut down in cascade failure. Blast doors sealed, life support systems activated their emergency safety protocols. And most importantly, the planetary disruptor weapons entered permanent lockdown mode. "The station is dead," Voidwalker reported from her position near the power core. "Their central AI has experienced what humans might call a nervous breakdown. All automated systems are non-responsive." But even as Marcus felt relief at their victory, he knew the cost had been severe. Crystal Wing's consciousness had been damaged by the AIS death throes, leaving her in a psychic coma that might last for cycles. Around the station, Liberation Fleet casualties mounted as the enemy switched to manual operation of their remaining weapons. "All ships." "This is Admiral Kethver," came the transmission from the Free People's flagship. "We have confirmation that the planetary disruptors are neutralized. Mission accomplished. Begin withdrawal sequence." "Wait," Marcus said, an idea forming in his mind. "Starheart, how many enemy personnel are still alive on that station?" "Approximately 50,000, the Dragon replied after extending his senses through the facility. "They are trapped in sealed sections with limited life support. Can we get a message to them?" "If you wish." "But why would you want to communicate with—" Starheart's mental voice cut off as he understood Marcus's intention. "Ah, you would offer them mercy." What Marcus did next would become legend throughout the galaxy. Instead of leaving their enemies to die in their disabled fortress, he opened communication channels to every section of the station and made an offer that no destroyer commander had ever heard before. "This is Commander Marcus Chen of the Liberation Fleet." His voice echoed through the dying station's corridors. "Your weapons are disabled, your AI is dead, and your life support is failing. But you don't have to die here. Surrender now, renounce your allegiance to the Destroyer Empire, and you will be given quarter. You will be treated with dignity, fed, housed, and eventually return to your families." The response was silence that stretched for long minutes. Then, one by one, surrender signals began appearing on the Liberation Fleet's screens. Enemy soldiers who had never known anything but a culture of domination were choosing to trust in the mercy of beings they had been taught to consider inferior. "Why?" came a transmission from what had been the station's command center. The voice belonged to a Zephyrian officer whose confusion was evident even through the translator. "We are your enemies. We have enslaved your worlds, tortured your people. Why offer us mercy?" Marcus looked around the bridge at the assembled beings from dozens of worlds, dragons and humans, Veltar and reformed Sectar, all working together toward a common goal. 5 years after the liberation of Command Station Omega-7, Marcus stood in the observation deck of New Harmony Station. Watching the latest group of human colonists arrive from Earth, the space around the station buzzed with activity, as ships from hundreds of species came and went, all part of the Galactic Liberation Alliance that had grown from their desperate prison. Break into something magnificent. The dragons had healed. Crystal Wing floated nearby, her consciousness fully recovered and expanded by her experience with the AI. She had become their chief diplomat. Her unique ability to bridge different forms of consciousness, making her invaluable in negotiations between species that had been enemies for millennia. The former destroyer territories report another successful referendum, she informed Marcus, her mental voice carrying notes of quiet satisfaction. "The Rigel colonies have voted to join the alliance. That makes 47 systems this month alone." Marcus nodded, still amazed by how quickly the old empire had crumbled once its foundational lies were exposed. The revelation that most inferior species had actually been equals or superiors before genetic manipulation and conditioning had shattered the destroyer ideology completely. Entire fleets had defected, bringing with them detailed records of every war crime committed in the name of galactic order. "And the trials?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be complicated. "Proceeding slowly but fairly," replied Starheart from his position coiled around the station's central spire. "The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has processed nearly 10,000 cases. Some former destroyers are choosing rehabilitation and community service, others— the dragon's mental voice carried sadness. Others cannot accept that their entire worldview was built on lies. They remain in secure facilities, being cared for but unable to participate in society. Through the viewport, Marcus watched a massive ship approach the station's docking rings. It was a hybrid design, combining human engineering principles with dragon psychic enhancement systems and Veltar energy manipulation technology. This was the future they were building together, not the domination of one species over others, but genuine cooperation between different forms of consciousness. Captain Morrison, now Admiral Morrison and commander of the Alliance Defense Force, joined them on the observation deck. Her expression was thoughtful as she reviewed the latest intelligence reports. Earth's integration is proceeding better than expected, she reported. The United Nations has voted to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Alliance, and 3 countries have already requested assistance with space-borne infrastructure projects. And the response to the Dragon revelations? Marcus asked. He had been worried about humanity's reaction to learning that their oldest myths and legends had been based on real beings who had watched over them from the stars. Mixed, but mostly positive, Morrison replied. The scientific community is fascinated by the implications for human evolution and consciousness development. Religious groups are divided. Some see it as validation of their beliefs about divine guardians. Others are struggling to reconcile dragon existence with their theology. Tidal singers' melodic laughter rippled through the mental link. Let them debate. Truth does not require unanimous acceptance to remain truth. Your species will adapt, as it always has. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Alliance Council chambers. Admiral Kethver's image appeared on the main display, his skin showing the deep blue patterns that indicated extreme concern. Marcus, we have a problem, the Admiral said without preamble. Long-range sensors have detected a massive fleet approaching from beyond the galactic rim. Ship designs are unknown, but energy signatures suggest they're using technology centuries ahead of anything in our databases. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Destroyers? No, Kethver replied grimly. These are something else entirely. The fleet is transmitting on frequencies that our linguists say shouldn't be possible. They're using quantum harmonics to encode information directly into space-time itself. Voidwalker's obsidian form materialized beside them as she phased back from normal space. Having heard the transmission through the quantum foam, I know those frequencies, she said, her mental voice carrying overtones of awe and concern. They are the songs of the architects, the ones who came before all current civilizations. Starheart's massive head turned toward her, ancient eyes reflecting depths of sudden understanding. The architects? But they disappeared millions of years ago, before even the first dragon eggs were laid on distant worlds. Not disappeared, Voidwalker corrected. They withdrew beyond the galactic edge to observe and wait. They seeded the galaxy with life, then stepped back to see what would grow from their efforts. Marcus felt pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. They're coming back because of what we've accomplished. The Alliance, the end of the Destroyer Empire, the cooperation between species, we've passed some kind of test. Or failed it catastrophically, Crystal Wing observed with characteristic directness. Architects were known for their decisive responses to civilizations that disappointed them. The next few hours brought a stream of reports that painted an increasingly complex picture. The architect fleet was indeed massive, thousands of ships, each one apparently built from materials that existing physics said couldn't exist. But their approach was cautious rather than aggressive, and their transmissions carried mathematical proofs that suggested peaceful intent. They want to meet, Morrison reported after the Alliance's best xenolinguists had worked on decoding the quantum transmissions. Specifically, they want to meet with representatives of the Human-Dragon Partnership. They say it's something they've been waiting to see for a very long time. The meeting was arranged on neutral ground, an ancient space station that predated all known civilizations. Hanging in the void between galaxies, Marcus, Starheart, Crystal Wing, and a small delegation from the Alliance made the journey in one of their fastest ships. What they found waiting for them challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness and evolution. The architects were not a single species but a collective of beings who had transcended physical form entirely. They existed as pure information, shaping matter and energy through will alone. "Welcome," spoke a presence that felt older than stars, its communication bypassing language entirely to convey meaning directly to consciousness. "You have exceeded our most optimistic projections." "Projections for what?" Marcus asked, though he sensed the answer would reshape everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. "For the next phase of galactic evolution," the architect replied. "We seeded this galaxy with life billions of years ago, then withdrew to observe how different forms of consciousness would develop and interact. Most attempts ended in extinction or stagnation. But this cycle has produced something remarkable." Images flowed through the mental link visions of the galaxy as the architects saw it. Marcus watched civilizations rise and fall across millions of years, each one a data point in an experiment spanning cosmic time. The destroyers had been one attempt at galactic unification through force. Their defeat and replacement by the Alliance represented something the architects had never seen before: voluntary cooperation between radically different forms of consciousness. Starheart observed with growing wonder. "We are not just an alliance of convenience, but a genuine merger of evolutionary paths." "Precisely," the architect confirmed. "Humans represent the pinnacle of individual adaptability and innovation. Dragons embody collective wisdom and psychic unity. Other species contribute their own unique strengths. Together, you have created something that surpasses the sum of your parts." Crystal Wing's question carried implications that made Marcus's head spin. "What happens now? What is this next phase you mentioned?" "The galaxy is graduating," the architect replied, and Marcus could sense vast amusement in its mental voice. "You are ready to take your place among the greater community of conscious beings. There are other galaxies, other experiments, other forms of life that you cannot yet imagine. But first, you must decide whether you wish to accept this responsibility." As Marcus looked around at his companions, dragon and human and alien, allies who had become family, he realized that the question was not whether they would accept this new challenge. The question was how quickly they could prepare for it. The universe, it seemed, was much larger and stranger than any of them had dreamed. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything else since that moment in the arena when dragons chose to kneel not in submission, but in recognition of kinship. The greatest adventure was just beginning.